Welcome. Hi. So thank you for attending this virtual event organized by Word Up Community Bookshop. Word Up is a bookshop and art space run by local residents, many of whom are volunteers, and we can be found at 2113 Amsterdam Avenue at the corner of 165th Street in Washington Heights, New York City. We host events for all ages and sell used and new books in English and Spanish, and you can check us out at www.wordupbooks.com to place orders for wonderful books like Almost American Girl by Robin Ha. So yeah, also because we're not open for public browsing at this time, we started a GoFundMe campaign that helps us maintain our space and meet our obligations while closed, and helps fund wonderful programs like Lomas Lit, our book club. So Lomas Lit is a reading group, a book club, a discussion zone, and a quarantine era hangout time for youth ages 13 to 20. It started in summer 2020 as a book club that brought teens from across Uptown Manhattan neighborhood and the country. And it's great. I'm one of the co-facilitators and also the Word Up youth programs manager. And I just came from our Lomas Lit book club where we were discussing Almost American Girl and having a great time. So thank you for joining us. I'm gonna pass the mic on to Ellen Lindner, who is a fabulous collective member at Word Up. And I'm really excited for this conversation. I hope everybody's ready.
Hi, everyone. Hi. So my name is Ellen Lindner, and I'm a cartoonist, an educator, and a comics editor living in Washington Heights. I'm also lucky enough to be a part of the Word Up Volunteer Collective. And I'm so excited to be speaking today with the author of Almost American Girl, Ms. Robin Ha. Welcome,
Hello.
Robin. Welcome. Okay, Robin is very illustrious, so I'm going to read her full bio. Get ready, just for those of you who may not be familiar with her history. So Robin Ha, she, her, is a Korean-American cartoonist based in Washington, D.C. She is the author and the illustrator of Almost American Girl, a 2021 Walter Award honoree memoir, and Cook Korean, a comic book with recipes, a New York Times best-selling cookbook graphic novel. And if you guys haven't checked it out, it's incredible. You have to. So after graduating from the Rhode Island School of Design, she moved to New York City and worked in the fashion industry for several years before diving into comics. Her work has been published in independent comics anthologies, as well as in the pages of Marvel Comics and Heavy Metal magazine. She has been an avid reader of comics since being introduced to them as a young girl by her mother, a person some of us will be familiar with from reading Almost American Girl. She strives to make comics that are entertaining and also empowering the readers to become more accepting of themselves and others. Robin is currently working on her third graphic novel inspired by the Korean folklore of Gumiho. And I should note, she grew up in Seoul, South Korea, and she moved to the United States when she was 14, which is the subject of her amazing award-winning memoir, Almost American Girl. So welcome, Robin, welcome.
Yay. Wow. Thank you so much, Ellen, for such amazing intro. You make me sound very good.
Well,
Thank you
I've
for
known
the
Robin for a while and she's always impressed me, so yay.
Aw. Wow, I'm
Well,
so excited to have this conversation with you.
I'm excited as well. I'm also very nervous. Ooh.
Oh. Don't be, you know me.
Well, we had talked a little bit about how to run this this event, which Robin has so kindly agreed to. And I thought it'd be really fun if maybe Robin would show us some of the pages from Almost American Girl and do a mini reading from the memoir. Does that sound good?
My internet, I don't know if it's my internet or your internet, but it says internet connection is not good. Is my video okay?
Your video looks good. Your video
Okay.
looks good.
You're okay now. Oh, you're freezing now a little bit.
Oh no. Well, I think everyone can still see you. Do you want to try sharing your screen? Because actually,
Okay.
still image might be better than video on if anyone is having connection issues. In the chat, someone is saying everybody looks good to me. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah Barron.
Okay. All right, so let me start sharing my screen.
Oh, and if anybody has any questions for Robin after the reading, please put everything in the Q&A and I will grab them from there. And if you have any chats that you want to put, more casual conversation, just put that in the chat function, please. Thank you.
All right, so my name is Robin Ha. I am an author of 2 graphic novels, Cookery and a Comic Book with Recipes, and Almost American Girl. I just wanted to show you a few pages from both books. This is one of the recipes from Cookery and a Comic Book with Recipes. And so basically it shows you how to make Korean food through comics. And there's 64 recipes and they're super easy and very, very fun to make. So I hope you guys try either borrowing it from the library or buying it from local bookstores like the World Book, and try some recipes from my book. And this is some pages from Almost American Girl from chapter 3, My Name is Robin. So up until this point, I have visited Alabama for the first time when I was 14 with my mom during the summer break. And I thought we're going on a quick vacation trip. And it ended up that she got married to her friend in Alabama, who's also Korean American. And we ended up staying there permanently. And this is a few days before my first day of 8th grade in American school. Are you ready to start your new school next week? No? Don't worry. Ashley will help you, won't you, Ashley? Okay. You should pick an American name. It will help you blend it at school. American name. I always dreaded the first day of school in Korea because 김선희, yes. 이현수, yes. 하춘아, ha 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 ha. Yes. For real? That's your name? My Korean name Chuna is an unusually old-fashioned name, which is equivalent to names like Bertha or Myrtle in English. There goes old Mrs. Chunja again. Ha 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 ha. Besides being unfashionable, there are other reasons for me to hate my name. Mom, why did you do this to me? Well, ask your father. It was his family tradition. My first syllable of my given name, Chun, was often used as the names of country bumpkin characters in comedy shows on TV. So on side note, Korean names start with a family name and then the given name. And in traditional family, they have the middle syllable that repeats in throughout generations. So in my generation, in my father's side, all the girls who were born in my generation had Chun as the middle syllable, and boys had another middle syllable that everybody had. And then next generation, it will change to something else. And Chun is kind of like the worst middle syllable a girl can have in Korean. It's really, everybody like knows that syllable to be like kind of a like provincial, old-fashioned syllable. No kid ever forgot my name. Hachuna, remember me? We went to the summer camp together when we were 7. It was like a curse that followed me everywhere. But in America, I could finally get rid of this terrible name. This was my chance to start my life all over again with a new identity. Things like this only happened in movies and comic books, and now it was happening to me. No one knows her past. No one knows her name. She's a mystery. Who are you? Please, I must know your name. My name is... I had never thought about what American name I'd like to have. This time, I could pick the coolest name ever, but I had no idea what names were trendy. My step-cousin, stepsister, and I looked through their yearbooks for inspiration. How about Sarah or Jenny? Too girly. Courtney? They all sound too girly for me. There's some boys' names that girls can have. We picked a handful of gender-neutral names from the yearbook. I like them all. Well, you have to choose one. I was always drawn to androgynous female characters in Korean and Japanese comics because I was a tomboy too. My step cousins taught me this American thing. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a tiger by the toe. Robin. Robin, that's a pretty name. You'll fit in right away at school. Really? You think so? The R sound doesn't exist in Korean, so I spent all night practicing my new name. Lubin, Lobin, Robin, Robin, Robin. But no matter how many times I said it out loud, I just couldn't picture myself with this new name. That's it.
Yay, thank you so much, Robin. I love your depiction of this sort of self-reinvention. It's that like that panel where you're just like, who is she? What is her mystery? I feel like I feel like when you're a teen, it's such a like it seems like every school could be a new beginning, or you're just like, oh, maybe this time people will think I'm like really kind of cool and neat.
Yeah.
It turned out that the adjustment was a difficult one.
Oh, yeah.
Partly because you had been given no opportunity to prepare for it.
Right. And I didn't speak any English, so that was the major challenge.
Madness. So in the chat, people are saying brava, which I echo.
Thank you.
And kind of to talk about that lack of preparation. You in the book, for those of you who've read the book, Robin's mom is a huge character in the book. And you depict your mom in the end as a heroic figure, somebody who really made the best decisions she could.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, she's a human being. And along the way, there was a lot of conflict. She fought hard for you to have a better life in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes her methods were, let's say, unconventional. So I have a question. Sometimes it can be hard to tell family stories outside of the family if there's any conflict or any nuance. How did you come to terms with telling this huge story and making it understandable, explaining people's motivations? Where did you begin?
Wow, that's a really hard question. I guess I kind of envisioned talking to a good friend about, my early days of America. And like, whenever I go to a party or a new event or something like that, and I'm introduced to somebody, like they will ask me always, like, where are you from, And I don't necessarily take it as an insult or anything like that, but like whenever I tell people about this experience, like briefly, like, oh, I came here without knowing we're moving, and they're like, oh my God, but it's actually not that unique experience. I know tons of people who are Asian Americans who have very, very similar experience. Either their parents told them like a day before they came, or like, So I think like it's pretty common for Asian parents to kind of treat their children as their extension, and they don't necessarily feel the need to explain things to them, which is very like crazy in like Western perspective. But like it's pretty common that like in every life decision, like if you're underage and you're living under their roof, it's kind of like their way or highway. They don't like really, it's not really like they are ignoring you. It's just kind of like a cultural thing. So yeah, I mean, I did struggle a lot with that aspect of her parenting. I mean, and I was used to it up until that point where she made us move without telling me, and that was kind of like like really unforgivable for a while. Like I lost all my friends. I had all these comic books that I was really into that I couldn't keep up with, and like it was just like my entire life was gone in like a day. So it was a traumatic experience, but in the end, like I had this mentality that like she and I are a team. Like we like I don't have any siblings. My mom didn't really keep in touch with that many family members, so I grew up thinking that like it was her and me in this world together. So in the end, I came to the terms with the fact that she's doing her best to provide a good life for me, and I also wanted to help her to make her life easier, because like we're a team, we're a family. So
Your mom is just incredible. I mean, the way you describe her career trajectory in the book, I mean, she's clearly a super strong person. And yeah, it's so fast. I really appreciate your generosity in sharing the story with all of us, because you and your mom are both so so strong. I don't think I could have survived this experience.
no, I mean, I don't think you can say that until you actually are in that situation. Like, people are very resilient, people
Yeah,
are stronger than they think.
definitely. Well, Almost American Girl. I mean, for me, it's just like it's a great immigrant story, and I hope a lot of people on this webinar, I feel like this notion of coming to the United States as an immigrant is such an important narrative, and it became a very important one within the last decade, as we kind of struggled with nativist forces in the United States. I want to backtrack just for a second to something a little bit less serious, but very practical, which is, I don't know if everyone on the call is familiar with the steps of making a graphic novel. And so can you just talk us quickly through like the steps that you went through, and maybe how what it was like working with, editors at your publishing company? How did it come from an idea to a story?
Mm. So I guess, it's all very personal. Everybody has different, ways to go about making graphic novels. But I actually start with writing first. And my writing is very loose. I don't really write script. So I'll just write it like a journal, or just like a very brief synopsis of like, this happened and that happened and this happened and that happened, And then once I'm done with that, then, I'll draw a few character sketches and maybe like a first few pages of the book, just to show like editors and agents, like to explain like what the book is about, and that's how like most graphic novelists that I know go about pitching their project to publishers. So like once that is approved, then I would actually work on a thumbnail from the really loose synopsis. So my synopsis for this book was maybe 10 pages long. So like each chapter had like a page long description of what's happening. So that's pretty detailed, 10, a page long synopsis of one chapter is pretty decent amount of information. So I'll just take that and go straight to thumbnail. So then I use this program called Clip Studio Paint, which is a digital, like a manga medium. And it's really great because you can actually see the whole book in one glance. So like you can see pages, like, little thumbnails of pages all next to each other. So it's very good tool for you to see the flow and how long things are taking, like how long the scenes are taking. So I'll use that tool to make a very, very rough layout of the entire book. And then that would go back to the editor for initial, like first draft, edit. And then once, maybe go back and forth like that for like a couple more times to tighten up the entire book. So that actually is the most important. The layout process is probably the most important and most challenging process in the big scheme of making graphic novel, because that's kind of basically you're building a bare bone like structure of the entire book. So once that's done, it's basically you just have to, tighten up the drawing, that's like really rough pencil. So you're going to be inking on top of that, putting the word and word balloon. And then you're going to, if you want to use color, then color will be the last step. The entire process can take up to, it all depends on how fast you are. Some people can do a book in like 6 months. I don't know what they're doing.
Are they?
Are they sleeping or eating, or I don't know. I can't do that. So most books usually takes up like a year and a half to finish like 300-page book, or even more. I mean, that is also, a year will be really fast for a 300-page book.
Yeah,
right.
That's impressive.
So, yeah, that's like, I can't do that. Maybe 2 years is probably more realistic for like a graphic novel length if you're doing everything by yourself.
Yeah, I feel like I'm really curious now. Who's this 6 month person? Is it Cavallaro? Robin and I used to share a studio, and I'm just like, who was it? Who was it?
I think it actually Mike could be one of those people who can like finish a graphic novel in a year.
It's not. This is PSA, people. This is not normal. Graphic novels take forever.
Don't compare yourself to these people.
If anyone wants to do comics, get ready for it to be slow.
Yeah.
So when did you just so to give people a sense of the timeline? So the book came out in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
When did you start creating it?
So I started writing synopsis in 2014, and I think you were one of the first people that I showed like the first few pages to get feedback.
It's just like, yeah, I was so excited because Robin's first book, Cook Korean, is just like, it is such a demonstration of who you are as a cartoonist. It's just like so full of life. It's such great communication. It's just, and it's so useful.
Yeah, I use it all the time too.
And yeah, and so, oh, sorry.
Oh, so I started writing like the synopsis in 2014, but I couldn't find a publisher for it for like the longest time. Like everybody turned it down because I was basically nobody. Yeah, I was an unknown artist. Like, my name wasn't really out there. So a lot of publishers don't really want to take a chance on like a new artist, which I guess is understandable. But, it was very depressing. I worked so hard on it and like nobody wanted it. So when I was like really depressed, I started cooking a lot. And then I actually started doing like a blog about making Korean food, which became Cook Korean. So I worked on Cook Korean after I started working on Almost American Girl because I couldn't find a publisher for it, and Cook Korean actually found the publisher. So I took like a year off to work on that, and after Cook Korean came out, I shopped around for Almost American Girl again, and I found a publisher for it. So the working part of the books took about 2.5 years, and it took another year to come out into the bookstore. Yeah,
that's a good. I feel like if anyone on this call is interested in like how the book industry works or how the comics industry works, it's definitely not instant. I mean, there are parts of the comics industry where you can just actually, and Lana in the chat is saying that's quick, and yeah, it kind of is quick. It sounds like forever, but 6 years from an idea to publication in publishing is not uncommon.
Right. Yeah.
There's a flip side to this. I mean, if anyone on the call is interested in making comics, you can literally just draw on a piece of paper, photocopy it, and be handing it out that day. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Memphis just put zines in the chat. It's true. And so if anyone on this call is interested in becoming a cartoonist, there's so many different avenues for doing it. And so Robin is her path is one path. And actually, I'm curious, I would like to talk to you a little bit about your next project. But first, I want to talk about kind of like a serious issue. I feel like, within the last year, there's been a lot of consciousness raising about violence and bullying towards people from Asian and Pacific Islander backgrounds. And in your book, there's quite a disturbing depiction of some of the racially oriented treatment that you received when you first came to the United States. I mean, it sounds like you came from Korea, which is very monocultural compared to the United States. You had never experienced racism before because you you weren't in a society like the United States where there's so many different cultures, occasionally, being mean to each other. And so for me, it's kind of a depiction of, I think it's really important because it's an individual story about how this can impact a particular person. But I was wondering if you could talk about like what you, like in the book, you basically, you confront the person eventually, but what would you say to a kid right now who's going through something like that?
Yeah, it's a very difficult issue, and there is really no quick silver bullet for this problem, so what I'll say is don't go through it alone. I think it's very important that you speak to somebody about it. Like if you have a good friend about, you're feeling comfortable talking about this, please talk to them, talk to your teachers, talk to your parents, like talk to adults that you can trust and protect you, because like when you're a kid, like in my case, like I thought I could handle it alone. And I was kind of lucky that this kid who was bullying me, when I actually told him off, he stopped. But that's also it doesn't, I mean, it's not guaranteed that's going to happen, you know, like it might aggravate it worse, or it might not be enough to stop, you know. So in that case, you really do need to talk to somebody who can, you know, do something about, like your teacher, or, you know. So and also don't be ashamed about this. It's not your problem, it's this other people's problem. It's nothing to do with you or how you look or how you sound. And what I understand from my experience of being bullied, like these people who bully you they're the one who are more miserable, you know, like this is their way of expressing their anger and their frustration with themselves, you know. So don't take it personally. It's not nothing to do with you. So I think that shame factor actually makes it harder for a lot of young kids to speak up about what they're experiencing. So please don't feel bad about it and just ask for help. Yeah.
That's really good advice. I love the sequence in the book where your teacher has given you a notebook to write messages to her.
Mhm.
And the messages she sends you are so great.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's really an example of how a teacher or an older person can change someone's life, because it's so sad to think about a situation where you didn't have that.
Right. I don't know how. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if anyone has not read Almost American Girl, I mean, what are you doing? What are you waiting for? I mean, when I read it, I was just like, this book is so, it's a good example. People often talk about how stories that are the most personal can be the most universal.
Mhm.
It's a strange paradox. Like if you try and make something like this story applies to everybody, then it just kind of applies to nobody. But if it's one person's story told really well, because for me, like just your depiction of dealing with bullying, dealing with a situation that was kind of out of your control, just in terms of your mom bringing you to Huntsville, Alabama.
Out of all places.
No shade on Alabama, but I mean, it's. I love when you go to Virginia and the kids are like, "How did you end up
Yeah.
there?" Just wondering. Well, I would like to talk about your next project, which I think is really tied in with Almost American Girl, because basically, like in Almost American Girl, you kind of have this, I don't know how to, it's like you are so in love with manga and with Korean comics.
Mhm.
And when you move, it becomes like a thing that you really miss. And then when it's restored to you, it's so wonderful. And I feel like the story you're working on now kind of has something in common with some of the fantasy manga that
Mhm.
you were reading as a kid. Could you tell us a little bit about your next project?
Sure. So the tentative title is The Fox Maidens, and it's based on this folklore in Korea of nine-tailed fox. We call it Gumiho, but she's actually a really popular character all throughout Asian culture. So there is something similar in Japan and China and Vietnam. And I mean, like there's so many different legends about this one character. And I have always been really fascinated by her. I used to watch this show in Korea called the Legends Village. I guess you can translate into that 전설의 고향. And there were a lot of episodes of this character in it. It's a TV show of like old legend, like retelling of old legends, you know, like 30-minute length, you know, like a Tales from the Crypt kind of thing, you know. Korean version. And she whenever she appeared, I really like gravitated towards this character. And she's always seen as like a mysterious villain, and she's kind of like a succubus character who like, you know, disguised as a pretty girl, and like she lures men into her den, and like she pounces on them and eats their liver or sucks their soul out or something like that. So I always thought, like, what is her story, you know, like she's such a kind of cartoony, like one note character in all of these depictions, but I feel like, you know, she needs to be told, you know, her story needs to be told in a different way. So I basically wrote this very epic fantasy historical fiction set in 16th century Korea. Back then it was called Joseon. So there's a lot of costumes. So it's basically the same period as Kingdom. If you guys ever watched the Netflix zombie series from Korea called The Kingdom, it's the same time period. So there's gonna be some magic. There's some like shamanism. There are a lot of martial arts scenes. So all of these are kind of like the elements I liked from all the manga and manhwa that I read when I was a young girl. So like when I wanted to be a cartoonist as a young girl, those are the type of comics that I thought that I'll be drawing. But for some reason, my first two books had been nonfiction and it was completely different from what I envisioned myself doing. So this third book is basically like the first book that I feel like I'm actually, you know, like doing what I really wanted to do.
It's gonna but which is kind of, it's so funny how the publishing industry works. It's like you have to kind of like jump through some, I mean, your books have been so wonderful, but it's like, why couldn't someone just be like, let's have this Gumiho story right
Yeah.
there? So the chat has been,
Position to do what I want.
yeah, finally. You're like, it's so interesting too when people get to do the show that they always really wanted, or get to write the book that they always really wanted to. I find this so fascinating. The chat is blowing up about, Fox Maidens. Memphis is saying that Kumio came up in Lovecraft Country as a character played by Jamie Chung. Jerry obsessively watched My Girlfriend is a Kumio.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's a K-drama. Yeah, she's a really popular character.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds like we got some fans of this of this mythology, this world already. So I'm excited. If anybody has their questions for Robin, please put them in the Q&A. I will keep asking my questions until. So what are you changing the style consciously? Like, are you tailoring your style to this new subject matter, or will it look kind of like Almost American Girl?
It will look a little different. So like in Almost American Girl, I changed my style a lot. I guess in all three books, they're gonna be different styles. Because I feel like the style has to match the subject and the story that you're telling. So I mean, that can be also an excuse that I'm making up because like I really can't work on the same style for a long period of time. Like once I'm done with a book, I'm just like, I can't draw like this ever again. Like I'm so sick of drawing like this. So like when I was working on Korean, I chose to draw it kind of cartoony with like very like colorful, primary color to kind of like match the cookbook, fun cookbook theme. And Almost American Girl, I like consciously try to stay away from this manga or manhwa style drawing. Because I mean, manga and manga, I love them still, but I feel like the style is not really suited for this type of story that I was telling. And like I could not draw myself like a manga character. That just seemed very wrong. So I tried to draw it kind of more in a way more realistic, but at the same time kind of simplified. So like I don't really like comics that looks too realistic. Like there's some superhero comics that looks amazing, like it's such a well-defined, like muscular features and facial features. So I feel like those kind of distract from the story. A lot of people get too sucked into like details of the story, the drawing, that they kind of lose the pacing, of the story. So I try to make it kind of simpler, but still realistic enough that you can tell like different characters from each other and stuff like that. So the Fox Maiden is going to be more like, I guess, more like manga or manhwa style. So they're kind of more stylized. The characters are definitely like more attractive to look at. I mean, I was freed from drawing myself as a 14-year-old. Like, thank goodness I don't have to draw that again. So I made characters look kind of more conventionally seen, drawings from, manga and manhwa. But it's not as angular. It's more kind of like a hybrid, I guess, between the Western style and manga style. Yeah.
Oh, that's very exciting. Oh, we have a question. Let's see. Okay. Anonymous says, so in the initial kind of journaling stage of your books, like what you described for Almost American Girl, oh, this is an interesting question. I should have read it all the way through. I'm living on the edge. Do you write your ideas and storyline in English, Korean, or a combination of the two? That's a really good question.
Yeah, right now I only write anything like journal, anything in English. Like my Korean is actually terrible. So my Korean is stuck in like 14 or below level because I came here when I was 14. So like, for example, like I have really hard time counting past like 1,000 in Korean because like, as a 14-year-old, you don't have the use for numbers that's like higher than 1,000. So like when I have to think back, I'm just like, I have to count the zeros and like, what is this? So like writing in Korean is actually pretty difficult for me. Like even though I have no problem reading Korean and speaking it is fine, but like writing in Korean is like really difficult. My spelling is like 5-year-old spelling right now. So I try not to write in Korean because that's embarrassing. But so I write everything in English. Yep.
That is so okay. That I'm really glad someone asked that. That's really interesting. I was just reading that Jimbo Lahiri's last book. She wrote in Italian and then translated it into English. So there are no more rules. And there, of course, Nabokov was famous for writing in English, which was his second language.
Oh, yeah.
The Anonymous has come out as Annie. Thank you, Annie, for your question.
Oh, thank you, Annie.
I'm going to assume that Annie is not just short for Anonymous. This could become very circular. Well, thank you so much for that question. If anyone else has any questions, please leave them in the Q&A. I have to say, Robin, ever since the book came out, I have found the title so fascinating. Almost American Girl. Almost. Because I feel like in this country there is, unlike in many other countries, if you're born somewhere else, there's no path to becoming, even if you're a citizen, people always think of you as that other thing. Whereas in America, we have this myth, maybe it's a myth, maybe it's true, I don't know, but a myth that anyone can become American. So from your perspective, not to put you too much on the spot, but from your perspective, what would make you feel fully American? What would make you feel, is there, or do you feel like it's America that's the problem? And America, as we've seen with the racism against Asian Pacific Islander communities, is it America that's holding back and saying, we're placing barriers to certain people becoming American in a sort of like, I don't want to say like spiritual, but like in a sort of greater sense, because we only see America, as a white supremacist enterprise. How do you feel about that? Because the title, obviously you must have thought really hard about the title, and I'm really curious about it. It's a great title, but it's a title that in my opinion is very fraught.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it did take a long time for me to come up with this title. So I spent like literally a year coming up with title, and like my editor didn't really like any of the ones I came up with. And I was like exasperated. Like, I can't think of anything more. I don't know. And then she was like, oh, what about all American Girl? I was like, I will never be an all American girl. Like I'm not an all American girl and I'll never be one. So what about almost American Girl? And she was like, oh, I like that. So that's how, this title came about. I think it's kind of both way. Like, I feel like, no matter how many more years I live here, no matter how much better my English becomes, like it wouldn't matter. Like I will always be Korean American. I will never be a full American. And I actually would never want to be a full American because I feel like that is just it's a weird concept. Like I don't think anybody's really full American, like every state has their own culture, every city has their own culture, like you could be a full white American whose family's been here for 400 years and still, like if you're from like some, small village, and then you lived your adult life in, like, let's say New York City. I bet when you go back to see your folks, you feel like you're going to a foreign land, So I feel like there is really no need for anybody to feel like a full American. But I do think that there has to be some kind of, I don't know. I mean, I'm really glad that Biden administration just passed the Hate Crime Act. I think there has to be a rule, like, okay, you don't have to like everyone. Like, that is impossible. Let's face it, human beings, they have taste. They don't, like, if they don't really have interest to learn about other culture, like, they will never understand you, and you cannot force somebody to like want to understand you, so that is okay. If you don't want to learn about Korean culture, that is fine by me, but like, you cannot hurt me because I'm Korean. Like, that there is a line there, so there has to be some kind of like safety for everyone, no matter who they are, where they came from, to stay here and live here, with dignity. That's all we're asking for, really. You don't have to accept us as a full American, because that's just not going to happen. And we don't really want, I mean, that will be fake for us too. Like, like, Korea will be part of me forever. I am Korean. I look Korean. I love Korean food. Like, all of my family members are Korean. So it's like Korea will be always part of me.
Wonderful. Yeah, I feel like, sorry, my coaster is so far away. Apologies, everyone. Yeah, I feel like that's actually one of the great things about America, maybe, like, that you can maintain that other identity. When I was a student, I spent a lot of time in France, where there's a little bit more of a rigid notion of like who is French.
Yeah.
And I feel like, yeah, maybe we need to let it go. Let it go, let it go.
Yeah.
But I think that's so fascinating that it took so long for you to find the title, because that it is genuinely hard to put a name on something, especially a project that's so personal that you may not have that full distance from. This is your story. How do you title it? It's like the Robin Ha Project, like
Okay, the first title that I came up with was, Why Oh Why Alabama. And then I was like, nope.
This I mean, it's just, I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, not even like any shade on Alabama again, but like, I can't imagine what it must have been like for you to go from metropolitan Seoul to a relatively small city that's not really close to other large cities. It's not like you were in the DC suburbs where you eventually end up, or like even in a place like Seattle, which may not be the biggest city, but it's still a city. Still a city. I hear. Yeah, it's really, I just, part of that. And your mom is so fascinating to me, because in the book, you have this one passage where you show how you started living in the back of a hair salon. And then you lived in a 3-bedroom apartment, this beautiful 3-bedroom apartment that she had bought. And it's like your mom is always looking for like the next step, which I think is such a great thing. But she probably looked at Huntsville and Alabama and she's like, I can get to the next step from here.
Yeah.
I love that sort of.
I think she was kind of desperate. Like, she didn't really know anything about Alabama, She just thought, oh, it's America. A lot of Koreans don't really think about different states in America. They just think about America as a whole thing, which is kind of like unrealistic. I mean, considering how big America is compared to Korea, like the entire Korea can fit into Virginia, So we don't understand like how different states can be so different from each other. So like, LA is totally different than Huntsville, Alabama, but like our conception of America and Korea is like from Hollywood. So, we watch like 90210 or like Friends or Seinfeld, and we're like, oh, that's America. But then when we got here, like, oh, this is nothing like that,
It is, but that's not just Korea. Like when I lived in the UK, people would be like, oh my God, I went to New York and it was just like a movie. And it's like,
what?
It was, I did not ask what movie. They did not, they did not specify, but it's just that sense of, they're like, oh, like, yeah, that Hollywood notion of America that we sell abroad, much to our profit, but also to the, like, to the lack of a richer notion and a more complicated notion of what America is, and a more realistic notion. Okay, well, we've got a question. Let's see. Okay, so Glynis Fox asks,
Hey, Glynis.
all the way from Vermont, how did your working process change from writing nonfiction, like your first 2 books, to writing fiction with your Gumiho project?
Oh, writing fiction was so hard. I learned a lot last year. Oh my God. So like, when I was a young girl dreaming about becoming a cartoonist one day, like I wrote a lot in my diaries of like these ideas of like all these different stories. They're all fictions. Most of them are fantasy or science fiction, but none of them are like finished stories. They're just basically like ideas, and it's so fun to write ideas, but it's like another thing to actually finish a book, So, like after Almost American Girl, I like wrote a whole bunch of stuff, but none of them really like I didn't really like them. Like none of them were something I really wanted to draw. So like I wrote the synopsis for the Fox Maiden after like writing and failing, I don't know, like a dozen stories. And this was like something like I felt right away, like this is actually like something there. It's actually pretty good, like not like the first 12 stories I tried to write. And then my editor finally like, agreed that this is the one that you should be making comics for your next project. So I had a synopsis that's about 20 pages long. And then as I started to make layouts, I realized a lot of these things I wrote in the synopsis couldn't be really directly translated into like a layout. So basically when you're writing, when you're making a layout, you realize you have to write stories from action oriented plot. It has to be kind of plot driven. Like, I mean, I'm sure, a lot of people can disagree with that. I mean, I'm sure there are other cartoonists who has made very philosophical, very theoretical comics. I guess like even, yeah. But like for me, like when I write comics, I need action, I need plots, I need dialogues. So it has to be kind of like very like, it has to be different from if you were to write a novel, So I realized a lot of things I wrote in synopsis were like, and this person met and this person met and then they didn't like each other. So this happened. But like, you have to explain why they didn't like each other. Like what actually happened that they got into this argument. Like, so you have to make up all the scenes and, when you're writing the layout. So I realized that I was getting stuck a lot when I was doing the layout process compared to when I was doing Almost American Girl. Like Almost American Girl is because like I lived this life, like I know exactly what happened. Like I might have to make up like dialogue part because I don't remember exactly what people said like 25 years ago, but like the general gist of like how events unfolded is in my head, in my diary. So it's like no problem, I can do it. But with fiction, I had to really sit down and think about exactly how I can translate this general, plot into scenes. So like it took a really long time for me to actually do the layout part. Like writing a synopsis took only like a few weeks. Like I was done with it really quickly, but like making a layout took almost a year. I just handed it in and I'm doing the like kind of general edit right now of the entire book. Yeah, so I learned a lot. Like I learned that when I try to translate synopsis into layout, when it's a fiction, it's totally different from doing nonfiction with a lot of facts in your hand. So first I did like 10 pages at a time, like, and then I I got stuck a lot because I had to make up the scenes, I had to make up the dialogue, I had to draw all the panels, and then like when I get stuck, I have to start that process all over again. So later on, I figured out I could just make panel division first without drawing anything, and I just basically wrote a script this way. So I did the script instead of drawing on the Clip Studio Paint by just dividing up the panels, writing very, very short note of what's happening in that panel instead of drawing them. So I can just keep going. I can just keep moving and finish the entire, like I did like 50, 100 pages at a time of no drawing, just panel division with dialogues and notes. And then I went back and drew those panels.
Do you know, I saw a talk with Elsa Bechtel maybe like 10 years ago, and she was experimenting with working that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's so funny how cartoonists kind of get to this, like, I can't even, because I don't know if people, the fear of the empty page in comics is real.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's too stressful to have to think about how I'm going to fill it visually. And so what Robin's talking about, I mean, yeah, because Alison Bechtel, I feel like you and Alison Bechtel, her project was not a fictional project, it was one of her memoirs, but you were both solving the same problem in a similar way. It's like, I just have to fill these pages.
Yeah. Nothing is worse than blank page. You just have to put something there. You don't have to draw it, just put something.
Because it's so much easier to change a sentence
than
it is to redo a doodle.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. I'm sorry?
Is that how you work, Ellen, when you do fictional books?
Well, I don't. I find fiction, like you said earlier, so hard. Nonfiction is like, I got this, you know, like it's a question of getting into the granularity of it. It's a question of getting into a level of knowledge where you feel comfortable just kind of talking about a subject or like digging into a subject. Whereas with fiction, there's a lot of pressure to be original. There's a lot of pressure to tell a story that has never been told before in a way that will astound everybody. Whereas with nonfiction, it's like, this is a cool story. If you like it, that's cool. If you don't, fiction is tough. So I take off my little invisible hat. Yeah, thank you for asking that question, Ms. Glennis Fox. So Robin, I have to warn you, Memphis mentioned in the chat that you talk a lot in the epilogue about your identity. And there's a sentence in the epilogue. Is it really bad if I read this? There's such a beautiful sentence in the epilogue. Okay.
No, go ahead.
Get ready, everybody. So Robin wrote, writing a memoir is like wearing your heart on your sleeve for the whole world to see. And in my case, I was dangling my mom's heart along with my own. Writing this memoir was the hardest thing I've done in my life, apart from moving to America when I was 14. I can't say I'd do it again, but it healed me and made me understand and respect my mother a lot more. And I hope Mom finds more peace with her past by reading it too. When I read that, I was just like, oh my God. Oh. I mean, obviously everyone should read Almost American Girl, but if there was one thing you could tell people about your mom, who is an amazing person, like what would you tell people?
You know, moms are very complicated, you know, and they're human beings. And I think, family can be very hard on each other. I think family can be harder on each other than any other people. You know, we expect a lot more from them. We also feel like we're part of them. So, you know, if they hurt me or if you're hurting other people, it might feel more personal than like if some stranger says something to you or something, you know? So I think, my mother and I, like, we have problems. We are not perfect. I mean, it's like, yeah, the book ended in a happy note, but, you know, my life didn't end with the book. So, you know, we keep going. So, you know, there's new challenges and new problems keep arising, you know, as we get older and, you know, so yeah, I mean, but all in all, what can I say? I mean, she's an amazing person and I love her to death.
Yay, yay, Kathy. Well, thank you so much, Robin. I believe that might be Memphis. Are we just about out of time? Is that?
We are.
If anyone has any questions, please drop them in the Q&A right now. This is your 2-minute warning. Because Robin has been so generous with her time, and I feel like we've had a really fun discussion. I might just quickly read some stuff from the chat. Let's see. So people are just loving all Fox Maiden, everything. People are so excited. Veronica, who's the founder of Word Up and the general coordinator, says thanks for this great discussion. Yeah, people are just really psyched. You know, everyone who's read this book is just super excited to see what you'll do next. Let's see, we've got one. We've got whoa, someone's in there. Someone's in the Q&A. Okay, so Veronica Salcedo asks, thank you, Veronica. Robin, who are some comic artists you recommend us to also support and follow? That's an excellent question. Thank you, Veronica.
Wow. That's an excellent but also very hard questions. Like I need like 30 more minutes because everybody's saying. Well, I mean, I have to say Ellen Lindner. She makes amazing comics. So please check her out. And you know, I know so many amazing cartoonists like working right now. So, you know, like I think it's I can't really recommend like one specific person. There's a lot of them, and I don't want to offend anybody by not saying their name.
Well, what's the last book you read and got excited about? Or like, what's the last graphic novel you read where you're just like, everyone should read this?
Oh, I read this Korean comic called Bad Friend by Uncle, and I think it's Fantagraphic that translated it. So
Oh,
Uncle is one of those like very indie cartoonists from Korea. She lives and works in Korea, but like she has won a lot of awards in like Angoulême, and you know, like she's kind of internationally known. So I really liked her stuff. Her stuff is unique. It can be kind of tough to read. There's some violence and you know a lot of family dysfunction too in that book. Another book I really like, also by a Korean artist, it's called Uncomfortably Happily.
oh.
Young-sik, I forgot his last name, but it's called Uncomfortably Happily. I love that book. It's really funny. And it's also a memoir about him living in like a countryside, trying to like live really cheaply. We've all been there. We are still in there, you know, artists trying to live cheaply and just make art and try to survive. You know, that's the book, what he's talking about in that book, and it's really interesting.
Oh my God. Yeah, that just seems to be the eternal struggle. Like, how do you, because I mean, if you have to spend even 2.5 years doing a graphic novel, you know, how do you support yourself?
Yeah, it's
I mean, this would be another time to give your mom a shout out, because you guys lived together during cookery.
Oh, yeah.
She helped you create all the recipes.
Definitely. Without her help, I would never have finished that book. I lived in her basement for a year and a half, and I used her kitchen. She cooked with me. She ate with me. You know, she was there in every step. So.
Well, thank you so much, Robin. And thanks to Memphis, who just dropped a link to Bad Friends by Unko in the chat. Annie says, thank you for this event. What a treat. I agree. Glennis says, thanks for the great reply and for the whole discussion. Sarah says, yes, thanks. You were great. Well, I'll take that. Yeah, I feel like we've covered a lot of ground, like everything from Bad Friends to Lovecraft Country. You know, thank you so much for being here, Robin. I hope everyone, if you enjoyed this, check out the other events that Word Up is doing, and drop some cash in that GoFundMe so we can keep the doors open and the lights on and survive the pandemic. Memphis, do you have anything you want to say before?
I do. Thank you so much, Robin, for coming and talking about Almost American Girl. Thank you, Ellen, for having this conversation. It's always great it's always a treat to have an author come visit us. especially like, it's 2021, it came out in 2020, and, we really enjoyed talking about it, and it's a treat. Thank you for the Wilmot Lit people who came to the event, and everybody else. Yeah, no, thank you. I wanted to say that.
Thank you so
And
much for having me. It's been
yeah,
my
if you
pleasure.
haven't picked up a copy, obviously pick it up. Pick it up at Word Up. And yeah, no, thank you so much. Yeah, we have other events coming up, so you can check us out at Word Up Books /events, because .com/events. I have the link for that. And we have all sorts of things coming up and a fun summer planned. So, hopefully we will be virtual and doing some things in person, distance. So stay tuned. Thank you. Enjoy this lovely late spring, mid-spring weather. It's becoming nice. That's all I can say.
I feel like at least in New York, summer is here.
Right.
I don't know what it's like in DC, Robin.
It's hot.
The fireworks have started. It's hot. It's just like summer is here.
Summer.
Allergies. Thanks, everyone. Well, thank you so much again, Robin. It was nice to chat with you. Thanks to everyone who came.
You.
Shout out to Robbie. All right.